Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the first year head coaches, gave a quick grade for all of those guys. I think Kurt Cignetti was setting the pace. I think everyone understands that. I think Fran Brown did an incredible job over at Syracuse, and Kalen DeBoer walked into an unfair situation and didn't quite hit the mark the way that he wanted to in 2024. I think he might very well hit the mark in 2025, but we'll get into that in a little bit more detail later in this week. But teams with the most to prove as we head into 2025 is a huge topic of conversation. We did 8 yesterday. I got 8 more for you today, and we will dip into the Big 12 today, which we didn't do yesterday, but definitely some teams down there that I want to watch very closely. And we'll start with the team that has to do it. Oregon's got to be a team that's in the mix. And the reality is, I think they're kind of in the Texas spot, like we talked about yesterday, where it's a program that is very good, that you can feel confident that is going to be in the CFP conversation pretty much every year while Dan Lanning, while Steve Sarkisian is there. You got to break through. At some point, you got to make sure that everyone understands that you can take that next step. And Oregon, almost a little bit more so than Texas, because you remember last year was they lost to Washington twice, and that was what kept them out of the CFP. And then this year, you get to the CFP, and then you meet the team that you beat earlier in the season, you get absolutely railroaded. And now you're looking forward, and you're saying, man, did we really take the step forward that we really needed to this year? You're going to have to do it at some point. And 2025 is going to be a huge year for that. You are breaking in a new quarterback. You do have a number of guys leaving for the NFL, so there's a little bit of leeway here. I think more so than some of these other teams on this list, but the reality is you got to be in the mix. You don't necessarily have to win a national title. You got to make sure that you're in that conversation. And if you're not, then you're in a position where the confidence around Dan Lanning just slowly starts to taper, and that's never what you want to happen. I think Dante Moore has all the ability in the world to win them a national title. I think they are plenty good enough to win a national title. They will be someone that expects to win a national title. At a certain point, you got to break through, and then it's going to be one of those things that someone's going to have to break through. In fact, we'll talk about who's the next head coach to win their first title probably later in the week, and Dan Lanning would absolutely be on this list, but he's got some things to figure out, and if 2025 is not the year, people will be wondering if the year is ever going to come. So that's going to be really interesting to watch. That's an interesting question, Anthony. I do think there are certain things about what Dylan Gabriel does that when you are put in holes, I think it's hard for him to find his way back into games. Now, it's not to say that he doesn't have that ability. It's just to say every single time, he's not quite the take the top off the defense type guy. He's not necessarily the guy that's going to throw every single laser you possibly need over the middle of the field. He's going to execute the offense in front of him, and that's a great attribute, no doubt about that. But when you're down 14 or 21 points, you got to take some risks, and that's not necessarily what he likes to do. So that's definitely something to think about, and maybe Dante Moore can bring a little bit more to that offense, a little bit more of that downfield passing game, and definitely a little bit more of that mobility that Dylan Gabriel loved to bring us. And then I got Washington here. They're kind of in a funny spot going into 2025, so I don't want to put a ton of pressure on them, like you have to make the CFP or it's a failure. But the reality is, in the CFP world, we're going to have teams like Washington or possibly a team like TCU, and that's kind of the thing I'm worried of is you go out there and say you do 7-5 this year. Damon Williams Jr. goes up and down. You play relatively good football, but definitely slip up against the bigger teams and maybe have a couple of upsets here and there that you don't necessarily love. The question becomes, are they just another TCU? Are they just a team that the stars align perfectly for that 2024 run, and they're never really going to be able to find their way back up to that top? And the problem with that is, if you do that in this next year, then you got Michigan in the mix again. Then you got Oregon. Then you got Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, Illinois, and all of these other teams that are really building up pretty quickly. So 2025's got to be the year. Now, I really like this Washington team going into 2025. I think they are super dangerous. Don't know if they're going to be competing for an CFP spot, but they're absolutely someone that needs to bounce back and at least show people that they're not necessarily going anywhere. They're not, falling back into the abyss after an incredible year. They're going to get to, let's say they have to get to 8 wins or 9 wins to really show everyone that they're in a position to continue this way forward, and then maybe 2026 is the year that they get back on top of the sport in some respects. Texas A&M is one that you've had something to prove for a very long time, and you've taken a long time to prove it. I'll just put it that way. But Texas A&M fans are getting impatient, and it's kind of unfair because it is Mike Elko's only second year, but the reality is you lose games to South Carolina getting blown out, Auburn, and Texas to end the year. People are going to have some questions, plain and simple. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold, and it's one of those teams that you could get on track very early, you could get off track pretty early. You go to South Bend up in week 3, you got to make sure I don't want to say you have to win that game, but it would put you in a very good position if you were to win that game. You'd be in a position where the SEC would be yours again. You'd be in a position where you could walk into there, win a couple of games, be sitting on top of that conference, and then you just got to finish this time around. Now, this schedule is not easy for A&M, but it is navigable. There's definitely some spaces where they can make some big-time plays. I think they avoid Georgia. I think they avoid Alabama. I could be wrong about that, but for whatever reason, I'm thinking they're avoiding Alabama, and I think 9 wins. At least get into the conversation in 2025, and at least be in a position where you don't look up at the end of the year and you see 8-4 on that record book anymore, because that's got to be so annoying for A&M fans. Get beyond that 8-win mark and at least continue to build towards 2026. Tennessee's a team that, if it's not now, then when? As far as I'm concerned, you have Nico Iamaleava going into his third year in this offense, feeling very confident in what he can do and having all the ability in the world. I think you have guys on the outside that are going to make play after play. You do lose the running back in Dylan Sampson. You brought in Star Thomas, that I think is going to be a great player. The offensive line is a little bit touch and go right now, but they picked up some great players. Sam Pendleton over from Notre Dame. They picked up, they got Zalance Hurd back. They're going to be more than fine at that position. And then it's going to be one of those things where it's got to be the quarterback. It's got to be Nico Iamaleava stepping up in a big way, because he's going to be the biggest part of this team. No, there's no two ways about that. He's going to have to make play after play after play throughout this year, and they should have the talent at the quarterback position and around the quarterback position to win the national title, plain and simple. I'm not necessarily saying they need to do that, but let's just say they need to at least compete in the SEC a little bit more toughly for that SEC title. And then they got to win a CFP game. They got to find a way to not go into another person's building or to invite someone into their building and be able to get that win. One way or another, that has to happen, or you're looking at Tennessee and saying, is this just who they are? You know, they're just going to hang out right outside the CFP but never really be a danger to get in. That's a huge worry. And without Nico Iamaleava, or with him possibly going out the door, it could get tougher very quickly, and then recruiting could kind of dry up pretty quickly around there as well. Moving forward to the Big 12, Utah's got a ton to prove in 2025, and this is totally different than some of the other teams I just talked about. They don't need to get to the CFP. They don't necessarily need to win the Big 12 or anything like that. They got to make sure that they're moving in the right direction. Frankly, I think the only reason that Kyle Whittingham didn't retire this year was because he wanted to go out on the right note, and I don't know what the right note is for him, but the reality is, they're too good of a program. They're too well coached. They have too much talent that they got to be able to get it done. And I love the piece of Devon Dampier coming in from New Mexico. Very electric guy that can add a lot to that offense. They're not going to be a great team by any means. I don't necessarily think Utah is going to light the world on fire and win the Big 12 in 2025. They got to bounce back a little bit. They got to show people that they can get to 8-9 wins, that they can put themselves in position to really become the program that Kyle Whittingham built up. And then I would have to assume he's going to pass the baton on to Morgan Scalley, and then we'll see what happens from there. But Utah's got to deliver, or there's going to be some questions of, can they even handle the Big 12 right about now? Oklahoma State's the other one that I don't know what happened to this team, guys. I have no earthly idea. They brought back a 7th-year starter in Alan Bowman. They had one of the best running backs in the country in Ollie Gordon coming back. They had the most veteran group at offensive line, and they did nothing the entire year. It was all over the place, and I don't know if there was behind-the-scenes issues. I don't know if there were different things that really kind of went into that, but overall, it was terrible. It was not near what Oklahoma State should be, and they got to find a way to bounce back. Now, I'm going to do my best to pronounce this quarterback's name. I apologize to him. I apologize to his family if I do mispronounce it. But Maya Luiaki. Apologies. But Mayuialaki Smith, very talented quarterback for Oklahoma State, and a guy that came in late in his freshman year, played some very nice football. He now moves on to his sophomore year, and I think he's a guy that could play some really awesome football. I think he's a guy that really could elevate what this team is and make this offense a little bit more scary than it was last year, which isn't necessarily super hard to do, but very much like this kid and think he could really elevate what this team is. The bar is going to be lower. There's no doubt about that. You're coming off a 2-win season. I think you get bowl eligible, you get to 7 wins, at least get yourself back in the mix, and then maybe 2026 is the year that you really kind of get back onto the top of the Big 12, possibly. SMU, another one here. They shocked the world in 2024 in a lot of ways. Now, didn't necessarily shock me too much, because if you look back at my rankings, I did have them at 10-2 at the end of the season, but at the end of the day, they do get Kevin Jennings back, which is absolutely huge. you're also losing a ton of dudes. Brashard Smith going out the door, tons of guys on the defensive side of the ball that are going out the door that are going to be huge replacement pieces. But you do get RJ Maryland back. Was out for the entirety of this year, was the best receiver on this team, or he's a tight end, but pass catcher on this team throughout the year, and definitely a guy that is going to be awesome to get back into that fray. And then there's real worries around this defense. There's no doubt about that. I think when you look at the ACC right now, I'm seeing a lot of quarterbacks that can really take advantage of a group that is not as veteran as you want it to be. It'll be really interesting to watch what they can do, but the reality is you got to show people that you're not just a one-and-done type team. You're not a team that's going to pop up every couple of years and then fall right back down to mediocrity. Stick around for a little bit. Get to 9 wins and at least show people that you're going to be in the mix in the ACC going forward. Louisville's another one kind of like that because in 2024, missed the mark just a little bit. You know, they played some really good football at times, played Notre Dame incredibly close, played some beat Clemson, did some really great things. They got to build off that. There's no doubt about that. And I think the biggest thing is Tyler Shuck in a lot of ways didn't necessarily give you what you needed. And I think Miller Moss very well could. I think the running back room is probably about as good as you're going to find across the country. Chris Bell and Colin Lacey coming back is huge. And then tons back on that defense that are going to make Saquon Clark is a huge player that's going to make all types of plays for that team. I apologize. But overall, if they can't get it done in 2025, it's the same question that we have about Big 12 teams, that we have about ACC teams. What's going to happen? Is SMU, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, and all these other teams, are they going to slow down? Because at a certain point, there's only so much oxygen in the room, and Louisville's one of those teams that feels like they're kind of on their last bit of oxygen. So we'll see what happens there. Definitely a team that I very much like and love that running back room. So I do have some high hopes for what Louisville can do in 2025. Will be interesting to watch, and if they don't, then Georgia Tech and all these other programs are going to be able to lap them, and then it's going to be really hard to make it through that mess over the next couple of years. So that's going to be a fun thing to watch, no doubt about it. Maybe we'll do one more of those segments later in the week because I got a couple more teams that popped into my head. But at the end of the day, let's take our third break here. When we come back, we'll do my favorite transfer portal pickups. We'll do offense in the next segment. We'll do defense in the final segment, but we'll get into the offensive side. We'll get into a couple of running backs, 2 quarterbacks that I think are absolutely huge for their teams for different reasons, and we'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us.